Sunday because I was in Kansas City with grandkids. But Becca's name was brought to my attention when I attended a Care Portal meeting about a month ago, and I was amazed at her story that they told at that time. Becca had been one of those people that had needed help. She needed diapers. It was just a simple thing as diapers for her children. And she had been in contact with a church that every time she needed diapers, she kind of come into this, worked with the secretary, and finally the secretary asked her if she would like to come to their church and be part of their church, and well, it's come full circle. She's now helping other people. So I think she's got a wonderful story to tell, and I'm anxious to hear some more about it. So here's Becca.
I think I'm live here.
Yeah, you're live a different way.
So I'm still incredibly nervous. And so, church, will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I just humbly ask you this morning for the right words that will be pleasing to you, and also that can somehow accomplish what you have brought me here to do. I am so humbled and grateful that you continue to open up a way for me, and I don't feel adequate to be up here in front of your children, so I just ask that you help me be bold. Father, we love you dearly, and we praise your name, Jesus. Amen. I'm going to talk a little bit today about a little bit of science, and so before we go there, you guys will probably figure out the theme. Generational poverty. The way we define that in circles is that a family's been born 2 generations or more have been born into poverty. I firmly believe that families coming from this type of poverty, in general, are not equipped with the skills they need to get out. It's interesting in the work that I do with circles, we deal with both families from generational poverty and individuals in situational poverty. So situational poverty is usually something that comes on from an illness or a divorce, those kind of things that kind of thrust a family in poverty. What's fun about this, you guys, is when we all get into our class, our first 18-week class, and we kind of start identifying, what kind of poverty we come from, people from situational poverty, every time, I've done 10 classes now, have a lot of tears, and it's overwhelming for them to kind of bringing this to the table. And families from generational poverty, they'll gather around the situational poverty family, and they're like, oh my goodness, it's okay, and they'll make comments like, I'm kind of glad I was born into this, And so, but also what I notice about generationally poor families and situationally poor families is that my situationally poor families, they'll get out faster. Once you get some community around them, you get some light bulbs going off, they just kind of know what to do because they've got that in their background. They understand the skill set that's needed. Abject poverty, this is typically, we deal with a lot of families in generational poverty that I also define in Kansas as abject poverty, and these are families that are making $800 to $900 a month take-home pay. So, just really $12,000 a year, sometimes $13,000, $14,000 a year. If you do the math on your minimum wage jobs, if they got every single hour that was allotted to them, they would most likely bring home around $15,000 a year annually. And so that kind of poverty, when we're dealing with that, it just keeps families caught up in constantly putting out fires, constantly thinking about, everything is right here, right now. Future thinking is not something that, and future thinking, that is this part of the brain that grows and develops so that we can have strategies, we can think linear, we can go from one thing to the next thing, we can think about cause and effect. Really comes down to self-regulation. And survival mode just does not lend itself to that. Survival mode, a lot of times we're dealing with this part of our brain, which is very emotional, very quick on our feet. And so, this is something that I read that our governor said, and I strongly agree with this. Intentionally poor kids without interventions, it is highly likely that poor children will not get out of poverty. And so I agree with that. Generationally poor families, we have no idea how to not be poor anymore. I thought from the first time that I clocked in at my job at 13 years old that I was getting out of poverty. The whole time until I bumped up against circles. I mean, and I didn't go to circles to get out of poverty. I went to circles because of a debt I felt I owed the secretary, and in my mind, I was going to go in there and show them, you know, that I was already doing everything that I knew how to do, which was true. I was doing everything I knew how to do. But the thinking that I had was not going to ever get me where I wanted to go or where I thought I was going. You know, families in poverty, we desperately need to feel connected. And relationships, that's our primary motivator. That's our driving force. You know, that is the lens that we see our entire world through. It's relationships. And it was very interesting to me to find out that economic class-wise, that people had different lenses that they were looking through. And, you know, with families in middle class and families in poverty, we kind of have this joke, you know, in middle class when your car breaks down, you call AAA. In poverty, when your car breaks down, you call Uncle Ray. You know, the way that you survive is your people-based. It's how many people you know that can help you get where you need to go. And so that's just the lens that you look through. And you think about kids in middle class, how they spend their time in the summer. I teach art in the summer through the Rec Commission in McPherson, and I've got most all of them are just typical middle class kids. And you know, they come to my art classes, they've just been to swimming, and then after they get done with art, they're going to go to tennis. They just have this constant, and you know, a lot of kids in poverty, they're at home with each other, and they're playing, and that's, you know, so their world is just different lenses shape the way that we see things. You guys, I want you to spend just a couple minutes with your neighbors discussing, you know, what does the word community mean to you? What does it mean to you when you say it? And also, how does it make you feel when you use it? And how often do you use it? And so, discuss. So I promise there's no right or wrong answer for this. So I want to hear someone over here talk to me about what does the word community mean to you? Showing interest in a neighbor. Very good. How does it make you feel when you say it?
Well, it seems like right now in our community, you have to be very careful because some of them expect it all the time, and others they really appreciate it.
There's always that balance, right, with humans. Yeah. So, but in our community, you said that, and so that's important. Somebody here in the middle. What does the word community mean to you? How does it make you feel when you say it? How often do you use it? So she said people that you can count on, people that you spend time with, people that you know have your back, people that you spend time with on a regular basis. Vicki, how does it make you feel when you say it? Safe and strong and blessed. And I don't want to leave this side out. It's kind of a different spin on things, huh? The lady up front's making you guys talk to her. Is it a good word? Yeah. Yes, honey.
These guys said neighbors caring for
Neighbors caring for each other and helping each other out. Yes, and all those answers are right, and everything that you guys said, you know, this is a very personal word. So I ask you, you know, what does the word community, that word, mean to the poor? So when I got to Circles and started having all these revelations, they kept using the word community. And I finally got some courage, and I spoke up and I said, you know, that word community makes me want to cringe. I've always felt like, since I was a little kid with my mom and then being a single mom and having a lot of issues, that the broader community, from DCF to you know, the school system to courts to wherever I had to spend time, the light company, I just had this sense, and real or imagined, that somehow the broader community would be better if me and my kind would just go away. And so that word was really hard for me. I understood the word, I understood what it meant, but I felt like that was not something that I had access to. So, you know, since I started to do these trainings and I work with families, I spend time with families when they first come in, and after they come in, a couple of weeks, I taught them about the word community. What does the word community mean to you? Because I didn't know if that was just something that I was experiencing, and the largest portion of my families kind of report the same thing. Now I ask you guys, do families in poverty, do addicted cultures, do disenfranchised populations, do they have community? Yeah, they do. You know, you'll see a lot of amazing things happening in the trailer park. If you could ever spend time down there, you'll see that a lot of times trailer parks have one washing machine, and everybody uses it, you know, and so you'll see just a lot of things happening, but they just probably aren't using that word. And so sometimes I think if we can understand some of the different language that we use, you know, it can be fascinating for us. And one thing that I think is missing in trailer parks, in addicted cultures, in disenfranchised populations, is purpose. You know, when you guys gather in community, when you gather here, there's kind of an overall purpose that everybody is plugging into and moving towards. And so, you know, with families in poverty, certainly the absence of community and the absence of purpose, things can just be very dark. And so you watch families come into Circles, you watch them be invited into community, and you also watch them get a sense of purpose. And you watch people, that's always what I say is the beginning spark of transformation. It's not that they change, because that will come later, but it's that we're glad you're here, we want you with us, and we're all doing something together for the greater good. So, you know, I ask you guys, what's the number one bad guy in poverty? What is the number one villain? And so, I won't ask you, but just discuss for just about 60 seconds, you know, what is the number one bad guy that's keeping this happening generation after generation? And it makes educators have such a difficult time with children, mental health, hospitals, police departments. What is that bad guy? Discuss. You guys, it's stress, and more importantly, it's toxic stress. There's different arenas that are delving into this, and sometimes you'll hear it called different things, but it really is, they're starting to study the effects of and what that does to our brains.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
You know, we could spend a lot of time, and we don't have that much time to spend on this. And as I said, this is Harvard Institute for Developing Child. You can find stuff that Stanford's doing. You can find stuff from UCLA. Sometimes it's talked about as ACEs. But really, honestly, you know, when we talk about, so what is that? That's your fight or flight response system, right? It starts back here, and that is the only part of your brain that when it's engaged, lights up the entire rest of your brain. And so what happens in childhood, if there's nobody around when bad stuff happens and kids get scared and that system is lit up to help them get that shut down, and that happens more than a couple of times, you know, when we think about old country Kansas roads and we have those deep ruts in there that, you know, if you're going to take your vehicle down it and it's just rained, it's going to be really hard to stay out of those ruts. So we get those patterns engaged in the sides of our brains, and, you know, whatever triggers it, and it's different for every person, but, you know, kids and adults will just kind of go there first. And also, if you notice that when that is happening, because of all of the energy and that it takes to when this is happening, and it's a very important function, but it also can burn out synapses up here when we should be burning new ones. And so, you know, this is something that we're finally starting to figure out. We need this up here, right? To make logical, rational, informed, linear decisions. And so, in that piece there, so, you know, you've seen people that have come through some incredible things, and somehow they don't seem to have this toxic stress. You don't see that prevalent in their life. If there's caring, responsive adults around when these things are happening, it doesn't turn into toxic stress. It actually is a kind of stress that makes you stronger. And so, but when I run poverty simulations for school districts, and school districts are primarily middle-class individuals that I'm running the poverty simulation on, so they spend 4 15-minute weeks in simulated poverty, guess what the middle-class people start doing with their kids? They start leaving them at CPS, which is Child Protective Services, because it's easier for them to leave them there and try and get done all the things that they've done in survival mode, because people say, well, how come parents in poverty are not caring, responsive adults? You know, what is wrong with them? And, you know, I have pledged to be vulnerable, and I can honestly tell you guys, until, you know, spring of 2014, I bumped up against circles in 2011. And all this stuff was happening, and getting out of poverty was incredibly hard. And, but I would get home at night, and after all the things that I was trying to accomplish in the day, and I dragged kids home from the sitter, and I just knew that my kids needed me. Like, they just wanted me, and they're, you know, just all over me. And I was so raw that I just didn't even want them to touch me. I mean, and so, I mean, I don't want to tell you guys that being a mother has been an incredible struggle for me. But, you know, so I get it. People are just out of steam and out of gas, and there's all these things. And so, so, you know, and I work with a lot of women, and this is the amazing part. is that we'll kind of get into a little bit of science about what is the cure. But I watch people come in to circles, adults, because, you know, there's always funding to study kids, right? But what happens to all children? They grow up, you know, and become adults. And so we've got a lot of adults running around with this part of their brain that isn't developed. And so you see them still acting very emotional when they're in situations. And so, you know, when I have families come into circles and they're in this place and you can just watch it and they can't get here. And I've seen over time with caring, supportive, loving relationships that they eventually stop spending so much time here and this part starts to develop. This sound might be tricky, so we'll see if we can get it to go.
Resilience is the result of a highly interactive process between individual characteristics in the person and the environment in which that individual has developed.
It's really the counterbalancing of difficult things that may exist in the child's life with positive things that occur within the family, but even positive things that may exist in the community.
An easy way of thinking about resilience is like a scale with a fulcrum in the middle of it. And there are things on both sides of that scale, experiences of both bad things or good things.
Our genes shape where the fulcrum is positioned at the start.
There are certain genes that make a child more sensitive to the effects of maltreatment or parental neglect or witnessing violence.
The fulcrum may start out kind of more towards one side or more towards the other side, and that's going to make a big difference in terms of how much these subsequent events affect things positively or negatively.
Science tells us that experience moves the fulcrum, for better or for worse.
Even though we are born with genes, genes will respond differently to certain environmental situations as opposed to others.
What the genes are actually doing are turning up or turning down the expression of chemicals in circuits in the brain and the circuitry in the entire body that govern our responses to stress, to anxiety, to depressive symptoms.
When positive experiences accumulate and children learn coping skills that help them to manage stress, the fulcrum can slide, so the scale tilts toward positive outcomes more easily. That's what resilience is all about.
There's always an adult, or more than one adult, who is key to providing that relationship that helps to build resilience.
You know, when I was in third grade, my grandma always took me to church in McPherson every Sunday. She'd come get me and take me to church. And in third grade, I was in Sunday school, and there was this couple, and they said, "Can you go out to eat with us after church? Can we ask your mom and dad?" And I'm like, "Well, my mom and dad's not here." But I went with them, and they built a relationship with my parents enough to have access to me, and they just kind of took me home whenever they could for about 4 years. Some of you may know it was Brad and Mary Spillman. They had a very middle-class life, a very churched life. They had 3 kids a little bit younger than me, and you know, they made me mow lawns to earn money to go on vacation with them to Colorado. I also had a very invested grandmother in me. In grade school, I had very invested teachers. And you know, and there were other people too. So I think about my own childhood and the things that were happening to me, and but I always had, so when we think about that teeter-totter, you know, I always had these other experiences, you know, and I was the kid that second grade, I had a bike, and I'd get up early in the morning and I would just leave. I would go out in the community and look for middle-class homes to frequent. And I had certain moms, and they just knew me, and they'd let me come in the door, and they'd let me go straight to their kitchen, and I just open their cabinets and look at all the food, and they would just let me go through their fridge and their cabinets and eat. And so I never missed a meal as a kid. I didn't deal with incredible food scarcity, but there just wasn't an abundance, and it was usually one meal a day and some cereal. You know what I mean? And so just a different experience. I mean, I was really blessed back then. I don't think there were a lot of me running around McPherson at that time, and so moms noticed, and they just kind of took me in. But I had a lot of bad stuff happening, but I also had a lot of good stuff happening. And I've talked to some mothers that I deal with in circles, and I look back at their story, and they don't have anybody except a lot of abuse and a lot of neglect and a lot of things, and it's harder for them, and it takes longer. But they stay, and we cultivate this community inside of circles that says, we're not going to let you go. I don't care how long it takes you to get out of poverty. You know, we're not going to let you go. You stay here with us, and it's messy, you guys. It's messy, and it's hard, and it's frustrating. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. But we see little miracles along the way, and Ruby Payne, anybody familiar with Ruby Payne? She did a lot of work with education, and a lot of people like to kind of criticize Ruby Payne, and they said, you don't have any science to back this up, because Ruby Payne's whole plug was it's about relationships. And educators that could kind of figure this out, or you might even know some yourself, but they just had a really incredible way of building relationships with kids. And you know, Ruby Payne, she kind of got noticed in her own building, being an educator in inner city schools in Texas, and she had hard kids. And other educators would come to her and say, how come those kids do those things for you? We can't get them to do anything, you know? And Ruby just naturally had that ability to build relationships with them, and then she went on to get her PhD and do an incredible amount of work and build a model that was all about connecting and building relationships with kids in poverty, because that's the first lens that they see their world through. And if you can do that first, you can get them the other places that we need them to go to hopefully get out of poverty, right? And that's kind of how the circles model works. First we build relationships, and then we get to the other places. But like I said, she didn't have any science. I always say Ruby Payne was ahead of science. I don't know if any of you have ever read anything by Dr. Bruce Perry. He wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And finally, science caught up with Ruby Payne. And there's science that says people that have been in incredibly tough situations, who have this on high alert, this is dormant, we get them into mini caring, supportive relationships. We build community around them. We make it safe. And this part of their brain will actually finish wiring. And so this was fascinating for me when I started to pull these pieces together, you guys, because you know, why is it that it's so important for families in poverty to have this relationship experience to get to the next place in their brain? And finally, I found it, and it says, you know, for this part of our brain to finish wiring, even in adulthood, we need these relationships. So people in poverty are actually unknowingly seeking the right fertile ground to finish developing where they're supposed to go. And I know for a long time that science always changed, the targets always changed, but a lot of us are probably under the impression that our brains are kind of fixed, right? 0 to 5. 0 to 5 years old, and whatever happens then, that is just damage control. And so that's how I used to think. Oh boy, I'm probably gonna need my glasses again. I'll show you one more video, and I promise we'll have time to talk afterwards.
The social challenges that face modern societies, whether it's the ability to work productively, to be a good citizen, stay healthy, have their roots in early health and development. A strong foundation in early childhood results in much better and more effective development later. A weak foundation really puts us behind. The most important thing children need to thrive is to live in an environment of relationships that begins in their family, but also extends out to include adults who are family members in child care centers and other programs. What children need is for that entire environment of relationships to be invested in their healthy development. We've shown from decades of testing interventions that we can improve outcomes. But the magnitude of those impacts is not good enough. Science is now available to help us think about what we might do that would have a bigger impact than the best of what we've done before. So we began to ask, what could we be doing differently? What could we do to be smarter? Children who are at the greatest risk for the poorest outcomes in learning and health and behavior are children who experience a pile-up the cumulative burden of one after another of risk factors. And then the burden is more than any child could be expected to overcome. So we began to focus on the development of the adults. What could we be doing to strengthen the capacity of everyone who interacts with children? This led us to think about the kinds of skills you need to deal with adversity. These skills of focusing attention, planning, monitoring, delaying gratification, being able to solve problems, being able to work in teams, executive function and self-regulation. They're also the kind of skills you need to create a well-regulated home and school environment in which healthy development and learning can take place. And then brain science started to tell us that differences in those skills start to develop in infancy based on the environment kids live in. So how do those skills get built? Well, if you don't develop them early, how do you develop them later? Actually, you can build them later because the period of flexibility and plasticity for this part of the brain doesn't fully mature until age 25 to 30. And then the light bulb went on. The reason we're not getting a bigger impact is not because we don't know about how to influence development, but because we're giving information and advice to people who we need to do active skill building with. Skill building by coaching, by training, by practice, but we're not doing that. So we now have developed this theory of change that says we need to focus on the development of the adults who are important in kids' lives.
So try this.
How does that work?
That's a new idea. Buen trabajo.
We need to focus on their skills, their needs, in order for them to be better, more effective parents, in order for them to be better prepared to be employable, which would enhance the economic stability of the family, which is also good for children. Second of all, we looked at many people in preschool programs and childcare centers. And we said, what are we doing to build those skills in the providers? They need skill building as well. And also the community can help to build and reinforce the capacities that parents need. And the community also includes programs in which the people who work in the programs have sufficient skills. Third of all, what are the major sources of toxic stress in this community and how can we reduce them? Moving it up to a policy level, how are our policies strengthening communities' abilities to reduce source of toxic stress and caregivers' abilities to provide what kids need? The development of our human capital is our future. The development of a productive workforce is our future. The development of a healthy population is our future. This kind of future orientation is critical for healthy society. It's critical for a thriving business. It's critical for successful environmental relationships to raise children. It's all about being able to plan for the future, to have a future. And that's why this is so important.
You know, it says that plasticity, that part of the brain doesn't even fully develop till age 25 to 30. And you guys, I had radical transformation that happened at age 37 to 40 after incredible drug abuse and incredible alcoholism. And I don't know, there's lots of stuff about what that does to the brain too, But it happened in a bed of relationships. It happened in a bed of community. It happened where people looked at me and they didn't see the sum of my past. They saw the possibility of my future. And they said, Rebecca, we see something in you. And I did not look good. And you can look inside of somebody's eyes and you can see so much more even than what their outer appearance says. And they just said, we're going to hold you up until you find it in yourself. And I knew that I was a bad mom. And I had kids running around crazy to prove it, and they just acted like it wasn't happening. That was just incredible to me. They just acted like that wasn't even happening. I was so ashamed and so broken. Humanistically, we're all the same. I believe that we all love our kids. I get to do trainings with high school kids sometimes, and So, and when we were talking about economic class, we were talking about poverty and middle class and wealth, and we studied some case studies, and then we got done, and I asked him, I said, okay, do wealthy people love their kids? And these high school kids, and the teacher said, no, wealthy people don't love their kids. They said poor people do and middle class people do, but not wealthy people. And so I got to talk to them for a little bit more, and we finally came to a place where we understood that all people love their kids. And so, but it was just interesting, you know, because our worlds are so different. And we had kind of united poverty and middle class camps, but they didn't know there was no wealthy people in the room, right? And so they're like, surely, because they're just after stuff and all. So anyways, I mean, I just always find that kind of fascinating. You know, and culturally, we just don't talk about this. You know, choices, you guys, when we make choices, that happens up here. And when you make a choice and you think through decisions or multiple decisions, you're actually firing different patterns, right? And so, but, you know, this was fascinating to me when I got to circles. And I started picking up on the idea that middle class kind of operates from a choices and consequences framework. And I never thought about that before. I mean, at 37 years old, I'm like, man, I said, I don't think my parents ever talked to me about choices, and I'm not having that conversation with my own kids. And then I went to this school because all my kids were in elementary school, and I started to listen, and I could hear it, and lo and behold, that's all they were talking about every day. Choices and consequences, good choices, bad choices, good consequences, bad choices, you know, and so it was just fascinating to me until that moment that I had never even picked up on that before. And, you know, in a book, Annette LaRue, she did case studies. She got money from, she got funding to study income, socioeconomic status, homes, and so she would have field workers spend 6 weeks, you know, with a family from different income levels, and they were told, you know, the family was told just to act like I'm the family dog, act like I'm not here. Came out with is that poor kids and poor parents see their lives through a lens of constraint. And when I think about this, and when I kind of started to figure this out, you know, I would watch in certain scenarios. I would watch. We had, I got to be a part of a Head Start that was in a building, and I would watch, and those kids, you know, they'd be touching the walls, and they'd be going down. And it's like, keep your pockets, walk, don't talk, you know, do these things. And then I would watch sometimes with the middle class kids in the same building on Wednesday nights, and you know, they would touch the walls, and I heard one parent say, "What does that feel like?" to about a 4-year-old. What does that wall feel like? And so, you know, it's just different ways that we deal with children, and that parents also deal with children. And so, you know, and if you think about constraint, you know, I had one person, and I get this now, they said, you know, in poverty, we see somebody come and get a food box, and then we see them at Taco Bell, or we help somebody pay a light bill, and then we see them at Taco Bell. You know, and they're like, for us in middle class, if we needed to go and get a food box, or we needed to go and get a light bill paid, we would cut back. And I thought, yeah, that probably makes sense. Now I know, like, we just made some financial decisions, and we cut back. I get that. In poverty, that makes no sense, because you never cut back. There's nothing to cut back. So you get this small victory of a food box or a light bill paid, and you got $8 extra. You go celebrate. You know, and so you see these decisions, and the thinking is just very different. It's not right or wrong, it's just very different. And, you know, I just always think, you know, what does our Father desire from each of us more than anything else? You know, what does he want from us more than anything else? And he wants to be in relationship with us. You know, we're going to mess it up. And regardless of how bad we mess it up, he's still going to get done what he needs to get done. But he desires that relationship with us. And then you're exactly right. What is the next thing? He wants relationship with us, and then he calls us to be in relationship with each other. You know, and so, and that's good news when you're, especially when you're dealing with families in poverty, and we're talking about good news. Because families in poverty, you know, the thing that you've got to keep in mind is that relationship piece, you know, no judgment, curiosity. I want to be curious about you. I don't want to fix you. I mean, unless you're going to start a mission and a model where you want to help people get out of poverty, that's a different thing. But there's all kinds of poverty. Sometimes it's not just money. You know, and this is incredible at Circles, you guys. We have people that say, well, do you teach them how to budget? And I'm like, well, we have a budgeting class or two a year, but poor people don't need to learn how to budget. They need more money. It's a very different thing. And so, and honestly, we don't pay that much attention to finances in McPherson at our circles. We just don't. We pay attention to emotional intelligence, relationship building, you know, how to learn the hidden rules of class so that you can be successful, you know, mental health stuff that we need to pay attention to, all kinds of different things, because, you know, we have a belief system and we watched it live out that if we build people, the finances take care of themselves as they go along. And so, and also if you start talking about a budget to someone who basically, I always kind of use this saying that, you know, God is paying their rent. I don't know how many times God showed up and paid my rent through a human. You know, I remember one time at Thanksgiving, we didn't have anything, and somebody, you know, I'm praying like you do, and somebody knocked on the door, right, with Thanksgiving. I mean, those are the stories that shaped my faith, even when I was a mess. This loving, immense God still took an interest in me and was still interested in a relationship with me. And that's been a weird thing for as I've climbed out income-wise, and my income is, you know, incredibly larger than it used to be. You know, I was really terrified that I wasn't going to need God in the same way. I was just scared because I was so dependent on him for everything. And so, you know, that's been, and you know, now it's like at one point, I mean, I just felt him kind of share with me, Rebecca, you were very young then, even though I was older, but you were my young child then. Now you're older, and it's time for you to find other children. And so, poverty solved in 4 words, you guys. Know a poor person. Be friends with them. You don't have to pay their rent. You do not have to fix their car. You do not have to pay for them to go to the dentist. If you really want to get invested and start trying to find resources for them to do that, but if you go and you do those things for them, you will hurt the relationship. It changes who you are to them. But if at a ball game you see a family and you know their situation, you go and sit by them, just start to have community with them. Start to become curious about them. Start to invite them in and change their perception of the word community. You know, just sitting by someone and acknowledging them can do so much for the way somebody feels about themselves and the way that they live out their experiences. And yes, love your God and your neighbor. And I am so grateful because I don't know what God is. I don't know what he's doing. I just know that I still say, okay, take me where I'm supposed to go. And so I walk into these places, and you guys, I do feel woefully inadequate to be in front of, to be here. And you know, I'm a presenter now, and I'm from the trailer park, and I'm a single mom that was married and divorced and then had 3 children by 3 different fathers. A meth addict, an alcoholic, a Jesus freak. But that's not the sum of who I am. There's so much more to me than that. There's not a single story. I'm also highly intelligent, have an incredible, this sounds great, like, I can't remember. Anyways, they gave it to me in school and said I was really bright in that area. Anyways, I don't remember what that is. I'm scared and nervous. But, you know, and I'm funny, and I care about people, and all those things. And so, and I know middle-class people. I deal with middle-class stress now, so I'm worried about things happening 2 and 4 years from now. I'm worried about student loans. I'm worried about all these other pressures, but I never worry about my gas tank. I never worry about my home. I never worry about my air conditioner. I never worry about food, and that's a very different experience. Those things, energy and mental energy I used to spend. I would pay the rent, and I would spend the next 30 days thinking about the next rent and just trying to make the math work. And like I said, most of the time it didn't work, and God would show up and pay my rent somehow. And so I'm just really excited that you guys are here and that you wanted to see me and you wanted to hear from me. And I have cards. You can email me. If you have a loved one that's caught up in addictions and you want to give that loved one my phone number, I feel like every day I should be dead. I should be dead, and I should have drank myself to death and died, and I know that, and God spared me. And my mom said, do you think that you lived through that, Rebecca, because you had the Holy Spirit? And I said, absolutely not. I said, I think I lived through it because I had work to do. So anything on this side of that is a gift, and I'm running as fast as I can for him. And so my cell phone number, half of the poor people in McPherson County have it, because it's easier for them to call me and figure out if there's resources for them than for them to drive to me. And I also will talk to people struggling with addictions, sometimes just to give them hope and say, hey, I can tell your story. I was there too. There is a way out. Or sometimes I can just talk to you about loving someone that's addicted or loving someone that's in poverty. And I don't always have answers, but sometimes just knowing somebody can listen and that you're not alone is a big deal. And so I've talked long enough. I'm starting to ramble. Thank you. We can ask questions.
That people, I just know when I talk to a lot of people, and I probably do it myself, a lot of times people, middle-class people, will say things that make me think they think the person who's in poverty, it's their fault.
And
that
it's a choice,
that
too.
it was a choice,
Yeah.
and they made
Yeah.
bad choices, and so if they would just straighten up and make good choices. Do you think that's also an issue, the problem, the way we think, that we need to look at?
Easy to go there because that's the lens. And so, you know, I always talk to people about, you know, a single mom in poverty, she's got 3 choices and they're all bad. You know, work an extra shift, leave your kids home alone at night. You know what I mean? It's just none of them are good choices. And so choices comes from having some power and feeling like kind of like life's working for you and you have options and you have choices. And that really is, there's so many layers of how it all looks that, you know, and that happens up here. And the more you do that, the more you think that way. And that's a good thing. It's not bad. But yeah, I think a lot of times, especially with generationally poor people, they love God, they love each other, they love their kids, they want their world to be okay, but everybody around them is poor. And so, you know, what you'll see, some of the decisions that they make seem downright self-defeating. Like, why would you do that? But I promise you it makes sense in poverty. It does not make sense looking in. And so, yes, I think that if we can be careful, because a lot of times right or wrong also it lends itself to judging whether something's good or bad. And so, you know, and it's messy, you guys. And sometimes, you know, what happens when you have a kiddo in the lake and they're starting to drown and you go to that kiddo, what do? Is cling to you, right? You're like, no, stay out here so I can swim. You know, don't cling to me. And so there's, you know, I mean, there's so much that has to happen for us to be effective in thinking about how to get people out of poverty. That's one of the best things about the circles model is so much training happens for the middle class. But I really don't think that poverty is a choice 97% of the time. I really don't think it's a choice. I think people erect incredible walls out of shame, guilt, feeling judged. I mean, I looked around at you guys and at the houses and the cars, and I had absolutely no idea how to get that stuff. But I wanted that stuff. And it wasn't because I wanted fancy things, it was because I wanted stability. You know, and I had 19 families one night. We just had a mellow night. We drew dreams posters, like just dream posters. 18 of them drew a house. Some of them drew a trailer house. You know, and so they want the same things. They just don't know how to get it because you'll watch. I've got one mom. She's working 3 jobs with 2 kids. And, you know, somebody stole her entire paycheck out of her car at a friend's house the other day, a friend's boyfriend. You know, it's just all these things keep setting them back. And so getting that first $500 in an emergency fund, building that to 1,000, building that to 5,000. It's crazy. It's Murphy's Law. You get that emergency fund, bad things stop happening to you. But if you don't have that safety net, you know, I talked to, or if your safety net's a payday loan, you know, that is a horrible thing that our families come in plagued with. They cannot get anywhere. You know, and that's supposed to be decriminalized, but it's not. They're still putting people in jail for not paying them. So yeah, I think that's we can think in a new way and just become curious. Maybe this isn't a decision that they make intentionally. Maybe the sum of their decisions keeps them in the situation that they're in, but they don't want to be there. Yes?
In the word poverty, you have separated O-V-E-R, over. Maybe you've explained why, but the only thing I can think of, turn over a new leaf.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, when I got to Circles, they told me, they said, Rebecca, we see stuff happening to families in our community. We think poverty is the issue. We want to help solve it. They said we want to end it. And I'm a Bible reader. And Jesus said, the poor you'll have always. And so that sent me into orbit. How dare you say that? You know, Christ says this. And yeah, it's a lofty goal, But, you know, teachers, we see it on bulletin boards at school, you know, shoot for the moon and maybe you'll land somewhere in the stars, right? So I just want it over, you know, and I honestly believe I heard a man say this, and I don't remember his name, but the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty, I believe, is justice. Oh, that was our bell. Hey,
Yeah,
you guys
that
want
was
to
our
go?
bell.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank Becca for coming. I hope this has been enlightening to you. I know it was enlightening for me when I went to this meeting with Care Portal, because that's what it was all about, was Circles of Hope. And listening to Becca today has also helped refresh my memory on that toxic stress. I mean, I forgot about that toxic stress, because I think we, even as a middle class, deal with toxic stress every day. And so hopefully this is going to help you maybe deal with some of that toxic stress that goes on, and also give us a different insight into what poverty really is and how we look at people that are in a situation that we don't understand. Thank you, Becca.